I always thought the scariest part about living alone would be the silence. I pictured nights where I'd hear the house creak and convince myself it was haunted, or times when loneliness would press in heavy after work. What I didn't expect was how much I'd grow to love it. The small house was mine, every photo on the wall, every chipped mug in the cabinet, every plant lined up on the windowsill. After years of roommates and loud neighbors, that quiet became a kind of peace. The house sat on the edge of a wooded area outside of town. Nothing dramatic, just a cluster of thin trees, some brush, the sound of crickets in the summer. I had a sliding glass door that opened to a little patio out back. In the mornings I'd take coffee out there and watch the sunlight break through the branches. It felt safe, in that ordinary small-town way. The first time I noticed the smudge, it was early spring, a greasy handprint smeared across the glass. It was low, like maybe a child had touched it, and faint enough, I didn't think much of it. I told myself it was from me, or maybe my niece, when she'd visited weeks earlier. I wiped it off and forgot about it. But the next morning, another smudge was there. This one was higher up, more deliberate, like someone had pressed their palm flat against the glass. I actually laughed about it, because the idea of raccoons testing the door with their little hands seemed funny. I even texted my sister. Apparently, raccoons want to break into my kitchen now. Still, it kept happening. A faint print, then another, then a streak, like something had dragged across the door. I cleaned them every morning, shaking my head. Part of me liked the mystery. It gave me something to joke about at work, some small, harmless weirdness. At least, I thought it was harmless. One night, after a late shift, I came home around 11:30. The yard was dark, my motion light buzzing faintly above the door. When I got inside, I noticed the blinds weren't sitting flush against the glass, just slightly bent outward, as if they'd been nudged. I told myself I'd brushed past them earlier, though a tightness settled in my chest. I started locking the sliding door with extra care, making sure the latch clicked. Sometimes I even shoved a wooden dowel in the track, like my dad had taught me years ago. I wanted to believe it was overthinking, that I was just being cautious. But then came the night I woke up to the sound. It was subtle at first, like fabric brushing against itself, a faint shift in the quiet. I lay in bed, blinking at the ceiling, heart already beating faster. Then I heard it, a low scrape, then the unmistakable thunk of metal meeting metal, the sound of the sliding door's lock shifting. Every nerve in me went cold. I held my breath, straining to listen, and then it came. The long, deliberate slide of the glass door, moving in its track. It wasn't a raccoon, it wasn't the wind. Someone was opening the door. I didn't move. I couldn't. My phone was on the nightstand, inches from my hand, but even reaching for it felt like it would make too much noise. The house suddenly felt alive with every sound. My own shallow breathing, the blood pounding in my ears, the faint creak of the hallway floorboards outside my room. I thought about running, but where? The front door was past the kitchen, past whoever had just come in. The windows in my room didn't open wide enough, so I stayed frozen, praying the wooden dowel I'd shoved into the track earlier had slowed them down. Minutes stretched like hours. I didn't hear footsteps, just silence. The kind of silence that felt intentional, like someone was waiting too. Finally, with shaking hands, I slid my phone under the covers and dialed 911. My voice was barely a whisper as I told the dispatcher what was happening. She told me to stay on the line, to stay quiet, that officers were on their way. The next few minutes are blurred in my memory. I remember the dispatcher's calm voice, grounding me. I remember the flash of red and blue lights through my bedroom curtains. And I remember the pounding knock as the police announced themselves. When they cleared the house, they found the sliding door half open. The dowel had stopped it from moving more than a few inches. No one was inside. But outside, on the patio, the ground told a different story. Clear boot prints in the dirt, pacing back and forth by the door, smears on the glass, bigger and darker than before. Someone had been coming back night after night, testing the lock, leaving those marks I thought were funny. The officer asked if I had enemies, if anyone might want to scare me. I shook my head, numb. I didn't. I lived a quiet, ordinary life. That was the most horrifying part. It didn't matter. 4 weeks after, I couldn't sleep in that house. Every creak felt like a warning, every shadow a figure. I moved in with my sister temporarily, then broke my lease altogether. People told me I was overreacting, that nothing really happened, that whoever it was never got inside. But I don't agree. Something did happen. Someone had been watching me, studying my habits, waiting for the right night to slide that door open. The only thing that stopped them was a wooden dowel I almost didn't bother using. And sometimes, late at night, I think about how quiet they were, the patience it must have taken, the way they waited for me to notice, or not notice, those smudges on the glass. It's not the silence of living alone that haunts me now. It's knowing how close someone came to breaking it. When I moved off campus for the first time, I felt like I was finally stepping into adulthood. My apartment wasn't glamorous. It was a one-bedroom tucked above a laundromat, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the plumbing groaned at odd hours. But it was mine. No roommates crowding the fridge, no rules, just my space, with my mismatched furniture, my coffee mugs, my late-night study sessions bleeding into dawn. That first semester, I was proud of how independent I'd become. I worked part-time at a bookstore, balanced classes, and even kept a plant alive on the windowsill. I got used to walking up the narrow staircase to my apartment after long days, fumbling with my keys, dropping my bag by the door, and collapsing into the soft hum of solitude. But independence comes with a price I hadn't considered. You don't have anyone else to tell you what's normal, what's strange, or when to stop ignoring that prickling feeling in your gut. The first time I noticed the air, it was a Thursday night. I'd been at the library cramming for a psychology exam. It was close to midnight when I trudged up the stairs, half asleep, half humming to myself. I opened the door, and the apartment just felt different, warmer, heavy somehow, like walking into a room where someone's been sitting with the heat cranked too high. At the time, I thought it was just me. Maybe the radiators were acting up. Maybe the laundromat downstairs had been running non-stop dryers. I dropped my jacket and kicked off my shoes, too tired to care. But the warmth kept happening. Not every night, just here and there, like the apartment would hold its breath until I left, and then exhale when I got back. It felt lived in, but not by me. One night in early October, I came home later than usual after a closing shift at the bookstore. The streets were empty, the air crisp. I remember being grateful for the silence, the way the world seemed to dim after midnight. But the moment I unlocked the door, my stomach tightened. The apartment was hot again, hotter than it should have been with the windows shut tight. I set my keys down, telling myself it was nothing, and shuffled into the bedroom. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint, I thought I was imagining it at first. A thin, irregular wheeze, like someone breathing through a partially clogged straw. I froze. My first thought was that the upstairs neighbor had their TV on, but I didn't have an upstairs neighbor. I was the upstairs neighbor. The sound was coming from my closet. My body went cold all at once. The closet door was shut, just as I'd left it that morning. But the sound, ragged, wet breathing, was definitely coming from inside. I didn't move for what felt like forever. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was the pipes, or a vent, or an animal that had somehow gotten trapped. anything but what it really sounded like. A person, standing just feet away, breathing in the dark. I finally reached for my phone, my hand shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I dialed 911 and whispered into the receiver, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher told me to leave the apartment immediately. I wanted to, but my legs felt glued to the floor. I remember staring at the closet door, waiting for it to swing open, waiting for whatever was inside to come out. The police arrived in what must have been 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Their pounding on the door jolted me into motion, and I ran to let them in. 2 officers swept through the apartment with their flashlights, calling out. One of them pulled open the closet door, and that's when I saw him. A man, mid-30s, scruffy beard, clothes that looked slept in. He was crouched between my winter coats and a stack of storage boxes, blinking against the sudden light. His chest rose and fell in that same wheezing rhythm I'd heard moments earlier. He'd been living there, in my closet. Later, when the police questioned him, I learned he'd been in the apartment for days, maybe longer. He'd crawl out when I was at work or class, eat small amounts of my food, then slip back into the closet before I got home. That warmth I felt. It was his body heat, lingering in the air, long after he'd returned to hiding. I can't explain the violation I felt. Every late-night snack, every time I'd sung to myself in the shower, every moment I thought I was alone, he'd been there, listening, breathing. The police told me I was lucky. Lucky I'd heard him. Lucky nothing worse happened. But lying in my sister's guest room that night, I didn't feel lucky. I felt stripped bare, like my independence had been a lie. 4 weeks after, I couldn't stop replaying it. The warmth in the air, the smudges I'd brushed off on the bathroom mirror, thinking they were mine. The way I'd woken up some mornings to find my closet door open just an inch and told myself I'd forgotten to shut it. I think about how easily it could have gone differently. How one night I might have come home early, or forgotten to lock the door, or ignored that faint sound. I've since moved to a new place, with sturdier locks, and a roommate to share the space. But to this day, whenever a room feels warmer than it should, I can't relax. Because I know what it means when air feels lived in. And I know the sound of someone else's breath hiding in the dark. When you've lived in the same house for more than 20 years, the walls start to carry a rhythm. You know the sounds of your own space, the way the stairs creak on the 3rd step, the hum of the fridge that always kicks in around midnight, the wind pushing against the loose screen in the upstairs window. Our house wasn't big, but it had that lived-in comfort that comes with time. My wife and I raised 2 kids there, filled it with birthdays and Christmas mornings, and as the years passed, it felt like an extension of ourselves. By the time this happened, only one of our kids was still living at home, our youngest, a high school senior. He had a habit of sneaking in late after hanging out with his friends, tiptoeing through the hallway like he thought we didn't notice. We always noticed, but as long as he wasn't causing real trouble, we let it slide. That's why, when I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps in the hall, I didn't panic. I rolled over in bed, glanced at the clock glowing on the nightstand, and whispered to my wife, "He's home late again." She sighed, half asleep, and mumbled, "Talk to him tomorrow." I was about to close my eyes again when something felt off. The steps weren't quick or light, like my son's usual guilty shuffle. These were slow, deliberate, a steady, confident pace that sent a ripple of unease through me. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound moved past our bedroom door, then down toward the kitchen. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. My wife whispered, "Everything okay?" And I nodded, though my stomach had started to tighten. The hallway was dark, but I knew it by heart. As I stepped out, the faint light from the kitchen spilled across the floor. A pale rectangle that shouldn't have been there, because I knew I'd turned the lights off before bed. When I reached the end of the hall, I froze. There was a man in our kitchen. Not my son, not anyone I recognized. A stranger, standing by the counter like he belonged there. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't fumbling. He was calm, almost too calm. He had one hand resting on the counter and the other tucked into his jacket pocket. His eyes flicked up and landed on me without surprise, like he'd been expecting me to appear. "Sorry," he said casually. "Wrong house." At first I just stood there, trying to make sense of it. Wrong house, that was it. That was his excuse for being in my kitchen at 3 in the morning. I told him to leave, my voice firmer than I felt. My wife had come into the hall by then, standing just behind me, her hand clutching the doorframe. The man didn't move. He tilted his head slightly, as if he were studying me. "I'll go in a minute," he said. "Just need a second." That's when the fear really hit me. He wasn't confused or drunk. He wasn't stumbling through some mistake. He was composed, too composed, and he wasn't leaving. I stepped closer, trying to sound braver than I felt, and told him again to get out. My wife whispered that she was calling 911, and I saw the man's expression flicker, just for a moment. Then he smiled, small and strange. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I'm not here for trouble." But he stayed rooted where he was. His hand was still in his jacket pocket, and I couldn't stop wondering what he was holding. A phone, a knife, something else. The seconds dragged. I could hear my wife's voice low and urgent as she spoke to the dispatcher in the bedroom. My son had woken up too, his door creaking open, confusion on his face until he saw the man in the kitchen. I waved him back, trying to keep him out of sight. The stranger finally moved, not toward the door, but deeper into the kitchen, like he was inspecting the room. He glanced at the fridge, the sink, the photos on the wall. It felt less like a mistake, and more like he was memorizing the place, like he was taking inventory. I didn't approach him. Every instinct told me to keep my distance. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding, and waited for the sound of sirens. When the police finally arrived, the man didn't resist. He simply stepped back, lifted his hands out of his pockets, and let them take him. I never found out what was in that pocket. Later, the officers told me he had no ID on him. No explanation beyond what he'd already said. Wrong house. He didn't appear drunk, didn't appear high, just calm, disturbingly calm. They said they'd take him in, figure out who he was, but I never got more information. 4 days after, our home didn't feel like ours. The kitchen light at night made my chest tighten. Every creak of the floor sent me to my feet. My son couldn't sleep in his room for a week. He moved to the couch, closer to us, like he was a little kid again. People kept saying we were lucky. Lucky he hadn't hurt us. Lucky he didn't break anything. Lucky it was just a scare. But luck doesn't erase the memory of standing in your own house and realizing a stranger has been there. Quietly, deliberately, refusing to leave. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes at 3 in the morning, listening for footsteps in the hall, and sometimes I wonder if he really did pick the wrong house. Or if, for some reason I'll never understand, he picked exactly the right one. When we bought the house, I thought the basement would be the least of our worries. It was unfinished, just bare concrete walls, a washer and dryer, and a few storage shelves. My wife and I joked that we'd fix it up someday, maybe turn it into a game room, but life with 2 kids meant that project never got far. The basement was just there, a place to toss holiday decorations and laundry baskets. We moved in during late summer. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where kids rode bikes in the street, and people waved when you drove past. It felt safe, almost boring, and that was exactly what we wanted. A few weeks after settling in, I noticed something strange when I went down to switch a load of laundry. One of the small basement windows was cracked open, just slightly, the kind that tilts inward on a hinge. I figured I must have forgotten to latch it during the move, so I shut it tight and thought nothing of it. But 2 days later, when I carried boxers down for storage, it was open again, this time wider. I crouched to check it out and saw the dirt outside had been disturbed, faint smudges like someone had been pushing against the frame. I told my wife, and we both assumed it was kids messing around, maybe a neighborhood prank. Nothing was missing, and nothing looked broken, so I let it go. A couple of weeks passed, and that's when the little things started happening. At first, it was food. Granola bars from the pantry, soda cans, snack packs. I thought the kids were sneaking them after bedtime, but they both denied it. Then it was blankets. A fleece throw from the living room vanished. Later, an old pillow from the basement storage. My wife noticed too. She kept saying, "You probably misplaced it," but there was an edge in her voice, like she was trying to convince herself. One Saturday night, I went down to switch the laundry and froze halfway down the stairs. The air was different, warmer, stale, like someone had been down there too long. I scanned the room, telling myself I was imagining it, but the feeling wouldn't leave. I finished the laundry fast and locked the basement door when I came back up. The unease grew slowly after that. We'd hear faint noises at night, creaks, the shuffle of something shifting beneath us. We blamed it on the house settling. That's what everyone says when they don't want to face the alternative. Then one night, everything changed. It was close to midnight. My wife and I were in bed, the kids asleep down the hall. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place at first. Not the normal groan of pipes or the hum of the fridge. It was softer, rhythmic. Footsteps. I lay there, holding my breath, straining to listen. The steps were coming from directly beneath us, the basement stairs. I shook my wife awake, whispering what I heard. Her eyes went wide, instantly. Together, we slipped out of bed, as quietly as possible. I grabbed the baseball bat from the closet, my hands trembling so badly, I could barely hold it. We crept to the top of the basement door. The house was silent again, but the silence felt charged, like something was waiting below. I flicked on the hallway light, my heart slamming in my chest, and slowly eased the basement door open. What I saw will never leave me. A man, crawling up the basement stairs. He froze when the light hit him, his body hunched, one hand on the railing, the other clutching a blanket I recognized from our living room. His face was pale, eyes wide and sunken, like he hadn't seen daylight in weeks. For a second, none of us moved. He looked at me, I looked at him, and in that moment I understood. He hadn't just broken in once. He had been living there, in our basement. I slammed the door shut with all my weight, and held it while shouting to my wife to call 911. She scrambled for the phone, her voice shaking as she told the dispatcher there was someone in our house. On the other side of the door, the man pressed against it, testing, pushing lightly, as though he wasn't sure how much fight I had in me. My arms burned from holding it closed, but I refused to give an inch. Finally, I heard the sound of him retreating, his footsteps retreating back down the stairs into the dark. The police arrived minutes later, but by then, he was gone. They searched the basement thoroughly, and what they found still makes my skin crawl. In the far corner, behind a stack of boxes, he had built a sort of nest. Blankets, pillows, empty food wrappers, even a lantern he must have stolen from our camping gear. He'd been living under us, creeping up while we slept, taking what he needed, piece by piece. The officer told us it happens more often than people think. Basement dwellers, they called them. Desperate people who slip into homes and live unnoticed for weeks or months. But knowing that didn't make me feel any better. I kept picturing him crawling up those stairs, blanket in hand, while my kids slept just feet away. I kept replaying every sound I'd brushed off, every snack I'd blamed on the kids, every uneasy breath in the basement air. We replaced the window locks, reinforced the doors, even installed cameras. But the sense of safety we'd felt when we first moved in, that was gone forever. People like to think danger comes crashing in, loud and violent, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it waits beneath your feet, silent, patient, breathing the same air as you. And sometimes, when you finally notice it, it's already been there far too long. I thought babysitting would be simple money and easy hours. I was 22, buttoning together rent from shifts at the coffee shop and tutoring gigs, and it felt good to be trusted with someone else's tiny people for an evening. The family lived on the edge of town in a narrow 2-story house with a wraparound porch and wind chimes that sounded like glass when the breeze caught them. The parents were warm in their messages, thank yous, a list of allergies, the Wi-Fi password, and I told myself this would be another normal night. Dinner, stories, teeth brushed, lights out. I'd babysat before. I knew the rhythm. Make the mac and cheese, negotiate one more page, sit in the dark scrolling while the kids slept. What I didn't know, and what no one tells you, is how small and exposed you feel in someone else's house at midnight. It isn't just that you're alone in a strange place, it's how all the familiar noises are missing the identity you'd normally give them. You don't know which creak belongs to what, and every unfamiliar sound grows a history in your mind. Their kids were 2 and 5, both exhausted from a day at Grandma's. The small one fell asleep halfway through a sentence, his breath soft and wet against the pillow. The older one curled like a comma and muttered something about monsters, until he didn't. I tucked them both with the care of someone who understands the language of tucked in, blanket up to the chin, nightlight on the shelf, a stuffed animal arranged precisely so it wouldn't look abandoned. Then I went downstairs. The living room had those comfortable, slightly sunken couches where you could leave an imprint of yourself. The parents had left a bowl of popcorn and an old magazine on the coffee table. I sat cross-legged, phone in one hand, the glow painting my face a pale blue. The heater clicked on once and then off. Outside, someone's dog barked twice and was quiet. The house felt soft and thin-walled, like a paper theater. At first, I scrolled like I always do, absent, looping through other people's lives. My thumbs moved before my thoughts caught up. Then the house made a sound I didn't expect. Movement above me, in the hall where the kids' doors were. A step, then another. Brief, careful, like someone testing each riser. I paused my thumb without thinking. I told myself it was one of the kids, a blanket fetching mission, or a midnight snack. That's what adults do, explain the world into safety. I told myself I'd go up if they called. I told myself the parents had said they'd be gone late, but would be reachable. I told myself the world makes sense. The sounds continued. The soft scrape of a sock, the hollow thump of something set down. Not the quick, guilty scurry of a child sneaking, more measured, patient. My throat tightened into a small stone. I kept scrolling, because doing something felt more dangerous than doing nothing. I pretended that the screen was a barrier. Then my phone buzzed, a text from the parents. Don't go upstairs. Call 911. We just checked the cameras. There's someone in the house. I read it 3 times, because my brain insisted on misreading it. Don't go upstairs. Call 911. The letters blurred, and then sharpened like someone focusing an old camera. I could feel the popcorn bowl under my hand, a warm, oily anchor. The house felt suddenly too large, and I was too small in it. I should have stood up, I should have bolted, but my muscles had locked into that stupid, involuntary freeze that I'd read about in a sociology class and never thought I'd practice. The sound upstairs stopped, as if whoever it was had heard me reading the words on my screen. The silence that followed was thick and loud. My fingers moved then, finally. I pressed the 3 numbers and whispered to the operator, who told me to stay quiet, to hide, to lock the door if I could do so without being seen. I told her I was in the living room. She told me police were on their way. Minutes, stretched, elastic minutes, passed. I crouched behind the arm of the couch, phone to my ear like a talisman. The house felt close, as if the walls had tilted in. I watched the staircase, the thin strip of carpet leading to the upstairs hallway, and I noticed details I'd missed. A scuff on the bottom step, a little shoe print on the mat that hadn't been there earlier, the way the nightlight in the hall shivered when the HVAC kicked on. A soft shuffle, then a foot on the landing. The doorknob of one of the bedrooms turned, slow, careful, then nothing. I mouthed the words, "Please, hurry," into the phone until it felt like a prayer. Then came the voice, not raised, not panicked, just a man talking softly, clearly, as if he were speaking to an old acquaintance, rather than to an empty house. I couldn't make out his words, just the rhythm. He moved down the hallway, each footfall deliberate, making his presence a map. He stopped right at the top of the stairs. For a second he did nothing but stand there, the silhouette framed by the dim light. Then he leaned forward slightly and peered down, the kind of look that counts the room in a single sweep. I realized with a cold particular clarity that he could see the glow of my phone, could see the reflection in the dark TV screen where the light pooled. I imagined him reading my shape, small, hunched, held to the couch like a secret. The police arrived before he moved again. The knock at the front door was sudden and loud, the sound of authority breaking the room open. Maybe it's the way sirens make a body understand there's help, or maybe it's because someone else's shoes on the porch are a clear, human thing after hours of vague shadow. He hesitated, then turned and fled back down the hall, faster now, purposeful. I told myself I saw him slip out the back door, though in truth I only saw the rush of motion, the dark smear across the upstairs landing. Officers swept through, their flashlights carving arcs of white through the rooms. They checked under beds, behind curtains, in closets. They told me later they found footprints in the attic hatch and a small backpack shoved behind a dresser. On the cameras, those same cameras the parents had checked, there was a grainy figure moving through the house in the hour before I arrived, opening drawers, sitting on the edge of the older child's bed for a long time. They said he'd been watching. They said he didn't appear to have hurt anyone. They said we were lucky. They said these things with the professional cadence of people who see ordinary terror too often. After the officers left, the house didn't feel warm. It felt like a place someone had recently occupied and then left their coat behind, an impression that settles and lingers. I sat until dawn, watching the hallway, listening for any small, repeatable sound I could put names to. The kids slept on, their chests rising and falling, oblivious to the way the world had tilted above them. I left that night before morning and didn't go back until the father came home with new locks and a polite, embarrassed smile. He thanked me for staying, like I had done him a favor. I wanted to tell him he had done me a favor by having a working camera, by thinking ahead enough to check them, but what I wanted most was to say that I had changed in the middle of the night. The way you stop being a person who believes in ordinary safety and become someone who pays attention to small sounds, who reads light like a language. I still babysit sometimes. I still tuck and kneel and make popcorn. I still sit downstairs with my phone, but now the house is never just a set of rooms to me. It's an arithmetic of footsteps and shadows, a ledger of where people could be and where they shouldn't. And when I hear a floorboard upstairs in the dark, I don't tell myself a story to make it safer. I phone the owner, I put the phone on record, and I listen. Not because I'm brave, not because I want to be afraid, because once I let the light of that text convince me the world can be ordinary and then not, I couldn't unlearn the way attention keeps you alive.